you can make one choice, and you don't need to spend any time on stitching together your own tool chain. We have a principle we call first party equals third party. We try things on ourselves that forces us to have a certain discipline about picking the important problems first. The life cycle of your product or your service is a lot shorter than it was a decade ago.
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by Heavybit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
So what do you like about continuous delivery?
You get to move faster, you get to experiment more, and you get to connect developers and users without all the waste and all the barriers in between.
Well, now would be a good time for you to introduce yourself.
I'm Sam Guckenheimer. I'm from Microsoft Visual Studio Team Services, which is a SaaS for continuous delivery and for hosting Git and for agile planning and the basis of the one engineering system in Microsoft.
So you must see a really broad spectrum of users. How do you see people starting to adopt continuous delivery in real life?
Well, you're right. It ranges from, for example, what we see internally with the one engineering system, where we have 75,000 engineers in Microsoft as customers.
75,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is this the Git migration thing that we all read about online?
So that was part of it. The thing you read about online was the migration of Windows and Devices Group onto Git when we had this problem with the WDG. They have a 270 gigabyte repo as their core repo. That's one of 400 repos. That with classic Git took 12 hours to clone. Now, that's if it was successful, meaning your laptop didn't go to sleep, or the network didn't burp, or the Wi-Fi didn't screw up. And if any of those things happened, you had to start over. So we ended up having to fix Git for that and created the Git virtual file system, which gave us roughly 300x improvements in performance and has given us more since. So that's something that we announced and open sourced, I think not quite a year ago now. It's in our hosted service and it's in our on-prem offering as well. That's a part of it, hosted Git. We also have CI/CD service as part of it, and agile work management, with things like Kanban and dashboards and data analysis services as part of it. That's the weirdly named Visual Studio Team Services. Okay, it in fact works with any IDE, IntelliJ, Eclipse.
Right, all the ways you can write code.
Yeah, any way you can write code, and so that's the product group I'm in, and that's what we use internally on quote one ES, the one engineering system. To your question, Edith, about the range of customers you see, we see everything from classic folks who are very aware that they move slowly and are highly regulated and will say, well, we're not really a technology company, to startups who, say we're just a few people and they can sign up for free, and we love both and we serve both. One of the things I try to do is to share as much as I can about our own experience. So I curate a website, DevOps at Microsoft, aka.mswacDevOps, and share things like how we use Git and how we changed our test portfolio. An example is that in my talk yesterday at Index, I was showing how we use our pull request policies to run 70,000 tests in about 6 minutes, and that's on every pull request uniquely. And if any of them fail, we fail the pull request. And if a code review doesn't happen within 12 hours, we fail the pull request. So we get all changes reviewed, which we need to do for some of the compliance certifications. And we get a very high test reliability signal in the pull request pre-CI. And then if all of those things pass and security test passes, the pull request is squash merged into master and triggers a CI build. What it means is that in practice, we will fail about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 pull requests, but we'll only fail like 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 of the CI builds. And then post-CI, we'll do a second round of testing through the REST APIs and with test data like fake identities and so forth. And those will let run for an hour, and those all need to pass as well. So by the time we hit production, we have had a very high confidence green signal on the changes that are going out. And that really gives you the freedom to deploy frequently, and it gives us the freedom to know that we can remediate quickly, in our case, across about 15 data centers worldwide.
So one thing I find very interesting about this is that the sort of way that you're describing it, it's a very integrated system. So in my past life, when I was at Circle CI, we dealt with with sort of the GitHub ecosystem. You know, lots of tools that, you know, very sharp tools that did one thing well. And in my new startup, I'm very much more in the let us make one tool that does everything and is awesome. What's that experience like for your customers, and even for the people who are working on the system, where you have that sort of one holistic system? What can you do that you can't do the other way?
Well, so first of all, for us, it's a both and. Okay, so we have 600 some marketplace partners. Edith's company, Launch Darkly, is a great example of one of those.
I've heard of them.
And
thanks for wearing the shirt.
and you can think of this as a world with a whole bunch of co-opetition. Okay, so if you want to use our hosted Git and then use Circle CI for the pipeline, that works. If you want to use GitHub and then use our CI/CD to deploy, that works great. If you want to start a project, quote, a DevOps project on Azure, it's VSTS underneath that's driving that. If you want to do our Kanban and then use, you know, GitHub or GitLab or anything else, and then our pipeline, you can do all that mix and match. The benefit of the mix and match is that if you have parts of a tool chain today, you don't need to switch. So you can adopt in a stepwise way. The benefit of offering both best of breed and highly integrated is that for a customer who is new to a DevOps way of working, you can make one choice and try it, and you don't need to spend any time on stitching together your own tool chain.
So this is definitely a shift from the Microsoft of the past.
Oh yeah, it's if you mean the Microsoft of 5 years ago, it definitely is. I mean, one of the things I talked about yesterday at Index was our open source contributions. If you look at last year, 2017, the company with the highest number of contributors to open source on GitHub was Microsoft. And Google was a little bit behind, and then everyone else was way behind, if you look at that. So we're not just doing this in terms of sharing our own work internally. We're doing this in terms of sharing work with the community and GVFS. The Git virtual file system is a great example of something we open source. We're one of the I think if we're not the top, we're one of the top 2 contributors to Git, top 3 to Kubernetes, and so forth.
You're pretty senior at Microsoft. I mean, I know you were. What led to this change of direction?
I think it's both top down and bottom up. For example, we had our quote 1ES day, our One Engineering System Day internal conference last week, and I.
So, by the way, this is such immense scale that like you have 75,000 developers just using your own systems.
Yeah. So I had a few VPs on this panel with me. One of them is Gay Ball from Windows and Devices. And he made a very clear point that the most important metric for them is engineering satisfaction with the engineering system. So in other words, how happy are you with the tools and process? And how much does it improve your work? And is it better than 3 months ago? And so on. And that is for them the most important metric. And he made the observation that not only is it going up, but it is also bimodal. And the younger or less tenured engineers are showing a much faster rise in SAT than folks who've been around for a long time. And he said, and the folks who've been around for a long time are experiencing the who moved my cheese, right? And the young ones are like, finally, you're working the way we thought we were supposed to work, and this is what we want to do. And he pointed out, that's what we're optimizing for. We're optimizing for that next generation. And that's an example of the sort of top-down leadership. The bottom-up is exactly that. This is how people want to work. They want to work with the new normal.
Yeah.
The new normal is not that you click File New and get a website on your laptop. That was 20 years ago. The new normal is that your hello world includes a pipeline and is deploying, and that your next commit gets deployed, and that's how people start. So from day one, from the first few minutes, you want the pipeline as part of what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, this sort of way of viewing the world, because the younger people vastly outnumber the older people. So the number of people who are coming into this industry now is at an all-time high. And I think I was reading recently, the number of people who graduated boot camp last year was like 23,000. Whereas typically about 50,000 people in the US graduate CS in college. So like we're maybe doubling the number of people who are roughly joining the industry every year. And so like the people who had their cheese in the old place must be a tiny number. I mean, it might be more at Microsoft, but like is a tiny part of the industry relative to the amount of people who are coming in now and who are familiar with the new way of doing things. They're sort of being outbred almost.
Yeah, I think that's true, and that's true 10x if you look at it globally. In other words, if you look at the number of new CS graduates who are minted in India and China and countries that we used to call, quote, emerging, they way outnumber the number who graduate in the US. And they expect to work this way too. And we can't myopically focus on, the US or North America. I mean, we as a company have a majority of our business outside of the US. We need to play not just as a supplier, but also as an employer and a contributor in all those markets. So we hire there, we grow development centers there, and we want to be the place where people want to be.
So you're 75,000 developers, and I just keep coming back to this. That's a great quote, a great number. Like, how do you then relate that like what works at Microsoft scale might not work for somebody smaller? Or vice versa, or I guess the bigger question is, what are you seeing amongst the base of how are people adopting continuous delivery and all these trends?
So we have a principle we call first party equals third party. In other words, we try things on ourselves and make them work as part of our one engineering system, and then take them to market through things like VSTS. So I would not say that things that work for us don't work for people who are not at the same scale. There's some things we need to do because we are at bigger scale that you don't need to do if you're, 5 people.
Or even like 400.
Right, or 400. Absolutely true. But the case I always make is look, we didn't start cloud native. We have these long code lines, including in my group. We started with an on-premise Team Foundation server, which was frankly written as a monolith. And we have been over years refactoring that into microservices, is slicing the elephant one piece at a time. And doing that forces us to have a certain discipline about picking the important problems first. Now, I regularly meet with customers who are, starting that journey, and I regularly make the point, look, here's what we did, and it wasn't all that unlike where you're starting now, and you don't need to say, we can't get there. I've heard all the skepticism. I've heard all the throw it away and start over. We very much took an approach in our code base of saying, we're going to have one code base, develop cloud first, deliver continuously, have a sprintly release train that we publish. We happen to do 3-week sprints globally. We're in 131 now, and you can see everything we've done over the years and what's planned on the backlog in the docs, and you can see how our velocity is increasing with a sort of Moore's law effect. And the beauty of that is that, I can say, look, our baby's ugly too. And if you say your baby's ugly, you get people to say, well, not really, right? And you get to talk about your problems, and you get to say, look, these things, here's some things that took years.
So you think having lived through this transformation yourself from monolith to microservices, from the legendary 3-year Microsoft cycles to what you just said, like you can have more empathy of it's not an overnight switch.
Right. It's not an overnight switch. I have a ton of empathy for folks who are doing this. I have a ton of empathy for the change agents in enterprises who are trying to get them to recognize that they are software companies and they need to behave like software companies. I have a lot of visits from companies who, do the West Coast tour and ask, well, how do you work? Show us what you do so we can learn from it. And a lot of empathy for customers who are saying, we don't know where to start.
Yeah.
You sort of hear people talk about the complexity of where the DevOps world has gotten to be. And you talked earlier about, you're starting Hello World and there's pipelines in it, versus maybe 20 years ago when you started Hello World, it was file, new project, and you compiled it a minute later and it ran on your machine. And so how do those people, when they're doing their West Coast tour and we show them, well, all you need to do for this microservice world is set up Kubernetes and set up pipelines and set up all this complexity. How do we, I suppose, how do we tell them in a straight face that it's a better way to be?
Well, let's go to the Hello World part of the question first. Okay, so today, I can't demo this on a podcast, but you can literally start at the Azure portal, click the plus sign for create a new resource, click DevOps project, and you then choose what technology do you want to work with, Java, Node, .NET, Python, etc. And based on that, then what framework do you want? If it's Java, you get to pick Spring or something else. If it's Node, you get to pick Express or something else or whatever. And then do you want this containerized on Linux? Do you want this on straight Windows VM? And then you identify which account, and you click Start, and in 4 minutes, you have a Hello World site that is deployed in the cloud, running
with
the code in
end-to-end
front of
everything.
you, editable. If you edit the code and make a new commit, you'll see it when you refresh the website. And that's that we think is the new normal Hello World.
And I'd say in some ways that's better than what we did 20 years ago when we might have built something in Visual Basic, but we didn't know how to build an installer.
Right.
Like you might have something that could run locally, but you still had to do all those steps just to get it off your machine that were actually pretty hard.
Get it to another human.
Right. Well, there's this thing in the theory of constraints about attacking the next bottleneck. Quote, elevate the constraint, as Ellie Goldratt wrote. And 20 years ago, the constraint was getting the hardware.
Yeah.
And getting it set up and getting the networking set up and all this other crap.
Yeah.
So the fact that it took a while to package the app for deployment was not the big deal. Okay, today the infrastructure is available, it's flexible, it's instant,
Yeah.
right? That constraint is gone.
Well, I remember we used to just have the installer team.
Yeah,
Like you had a team who would build the nice installer.
yeah. What a ridiculous thing.
Well, I mean, yeah, and it's well, yes, it is harder to get a Hello World going, but to have somebody else see it, you've already felt that pain is gone.
Yeah, the more you get out of the cruft of these handoffs of specializations that are there to overcome the waste of the process, the more you get that direct contact between developer and end user.
Yeah.
And that really is what is, I think, driving this industry. I think that's what's so exciting about the new generation that we're bringing into this industry, because what they are experiencing is the chance to make a difference now.
Put something in front of a customer immediately.
Right. Yeah. Do something in minutes. Do more in hours. Whereas in the past, months to get just to get a deployment.
Well, because and then you had
ridiculous.
Because you had to worry about somebody going and getting your zip or your tar file.
Yeah.
And you hope that they could install it, and if they had to put it on their own database or in their own hardware, you had to worry about all that getting configured too.
Right. And so what happened in the old days is you basically had developers discovering that they wanted to work faster, and in 2001 we had the Agile Manifesto, but we still had ITIL, which basically was how you prevent change in operations. And then maybe 2007 or something like that, we started having Agile Admin, and then that morphed into DevOps.
Yep.
And so we're now with DevOps, maybe where we were with Agile in 2010.
I agree.
And if you think about it from a technology lifecycle adoption perspective, at the point where the early majority is saying, wait a minute, this obviously works, and we can obviously derive benefit from this, and we will disrupt or be disrupted.
Yeah.
And they see that the other thing that they see correctly is that this acceleration in the world is leading to a shortening of the value of any particular choice you make today. So the life cycle of your product or your service today is a lot shorter than it was a decade ago.
Yeah.
So the business consequence of that is you need to be able to make decisions about whether to persevere or pivot much, much, much more frequently. So effectively, the pace at which you can get the feedback from what's really performing in the sense of people are using and liking and recommending, and performing in the sense of the quality of service you're delivering, the more quickly you can get that feedback loop and act on that feedback loop, the more opportunities you have to learn or succeed.
So let me ask you about that, because we've been talking about this, one engineering system or whatever, set of 8 or 10 tools which sort of together form the set of things you need to do to iterate rapidly and to go to market faster. And my question is, are we done? And what I mean by that is, are there, there's some sort of complexity that comes from this, knowing how to build the pipelines and Kubernetes and Kafka and whatever else you need to build the whole thing.
Did you say Kafka or Kafkan?
I said Kafka, but just like the tools that are involved in bringing a product to market today in an agile way, and they've sprung up and gotten larger and so on over the last 10 years, but. Is that going to keep going? Are we going to see more and more tools that we need to fit into that thing? Like if you have feature flags and you have CI and you have code hosting and you have Python and Django or whatever, are you kind of done? Or I'll tell you one tool that I saw today. It was launched on Hacker News or something, and it was an edge delivery system for machine learning. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of the random dev tools that sort of launch every day. And is this one of the tools that is eventually going to find its way into when you start a project, you need an edge deployment tool for machine learning as part of your pipeline as well. And so are we going to see over the next 10 years a sort of an explosion in what we call, what we think of as the one system of what we need to build quickly?
I think the pace of innovation and disruption is going to continue to accelerate. So
for dev teams too.
Yes, I think that today's core that is differentiating becomes tomorrow's context, and I think that happens ever more quickly. Great example, you talked about machine learning at the edge. Well. In fact, what people are doing is they're trying to combine lightweight machine learning at the edge with deep learning at the service. And the compute's becoming more available, so the amount of data is growing at exponential rates, and the amount of learning that happens off of that is growing much more. So people try to do things they never could do before. That kind of change I think is not going to slow down. Now, I do think on the principle of today's core becomes tomorrow's context, the things that you worry about in terms of where we need to differentiate, where we need to be better, where we need to pick up the best thing, that does change. I basically think that, people aren't going to be arguing about continuous delivery pipeline in 10 years.
The need for CI, the need for feature flags.
It'll just be assumed.
But the kinds of things they're going to be doing, horrifically larger volumes of data, and the kinds of computing they're going to try to do, where it's really the data that's determining what you're doing, that will be different.
So how are we going to manage this sort of complexity? Like for a developer, if we just keep jamming in new services and new things that we need to be able to do, but we're not we're elevating the context to a certain sense. The what was it? Today's something is tomorrow's context.
Today's core is tomorrow's context.
Today's core is tomorrow's context. Well, tomorrow's core is the next day's context.
That's right.
And we've now we've got so many things that we need to know in order to be able to deliver a service. Are we sort of painting ourselves into a corner, and how do we manage that complexity?
If you have to know a lot to do the basics, you're wasting your time learning the wrong stuff. Okay, so you asked about the tool chain thing. So I think time spent cobbling together a tool chain when you don't need to spend it on that
You still need to be aware of all the components in the tool chain.
But do you? I mean,
can you build with feature flags if you don't first learn about a feature flag or what the elements of the pipeline are?
So this is a great example, okay? You talk about feature flags. How many people today know how to do meaningful metrics? So one of the learnings...
Far fewer than think they can.
Right. One of the significant learnings is that designing good metrics is as difficult as designing good features. And the metrics that you need to drive your business change, and you need to be able to respond and adapt at that level of frankly, business KPIs with this rapidity too. Now, do I need to know that behind the feature flags, there's CDN that is giving me so many milliseconds of performance advantage and allowing both code paths to coexist, and that gets multiplied in this combinatorial metrics, and be able to keep all that in my head? No. I do need to be able to capture the trace when there's a live site incident. I do need to be able to manage the feature flag in real time. I do need to be good at formulating the hypotheses that motivate the things that I want to put behind those feature flags. And that is new learning, new muscle, new skills that we need to do. Those are, those are moves in tomorrow's Olympics that you're not seeing on the slopes today.
Yeah. That's a triple axel, or that's the quintuple axel today's triple Lutz.
Right. I mean, you see these things that if you look at the Olympics today versus 20 years ago or what have you, you see people doing stuff that no one would have dreamed of. Okay. And I think in the case of our industry, it's more dramatic. I mean, when people are able to talk about computational biology and machine-assisted medical diagnosis, when you have speech as a service, image recognition as a service, all these possibilities start opening up that were not there before.
Yeah.
So do you see that in like 10 years time in like the Visual Studio Team Services is going to have those things as the core feature set?
I don't know what the product name will be, or I don't know what the mix will be. I do think people will be using services in 10 years that we cannot imagine today. I think that the expectation for what computers will do in 10 years, or computers is a bad word for what devices will do in 10 years, is wildly different. I mean, the 10 years ago, a mobile phone could do voice and maybe SMS messaging. Today, when people are saying, let me get my phone, what are they doing? They're ordering a ride on Lyft. They're, sharing photos. They're using apps that were, that if you talked about 10 years ago, people would have just thought you're nuts. Okay, and then you get into the whole, IoT transformation. and what that will do to the computing model, and that's clearly breeding this intelligent edge, intelligent cloud combination, and that will breed a whole new way of working. And the challenges we're going to deal with are not going to be, stitching together our authentication credentials for these different tools.
I mean, we'll still need to do that.
We'll need to have secure authentication. We're not going to be.
So you think we'll build better abstractions for the things that we have today?
Yeah.
So I think that the stuff today where you start by learning how to use SSH keys and how do you deal with PATs and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's like
that can't
we're
die
going
fast
to get
enough.
over that.
Yeah.
Right. We'll get the identity and authentication thing down, and and I certainly hope we get down the in that world distinguishing humans from non-human identities.
Well, that's what you say as a human.
That's what I say as a human. You're right. I mean, there's stuff like the what's the new Dan Brown book, which essentially is about the AI emergence, and the plot revolves around essentially the computer outsmarting its master.
Well, yeah, I mean that's Terminator.
Yeah,
I feel like I've read 100 of these books.
that's kind of the scary side of it.
I presume the AI is going to look at how to set up its SSH keys in the path, and then start learning about Kubernetes and be like, I'm actually not going to do this. This doesn't seem worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to become, it'll be plumbing taken care of for you.
Yeah, that's my theory. So we talked about the way off future. I love the way you framed it in terms of the early majority. What's your message to the people behind the early majority?
One of the things that put up on the web is DevOpsAssessment.net, and it's a self-service tool to figure out how your performance is and where your bottlenecks are and where you might improve.
But you have to care to even take this.
Agreed. Okay, so creative destruction is a fact of the way our economy works, right? It is, and I don't mean this as I don't pretend to be a libertarian. I don't pretend to be a believer in that regulation is bad or what have you. But if you take something like the Fortune 100 list, or you take the any other ranking of companies, the longevity of companies on that list goes down every year. Okay, so they get replaced, and value shifts to the innovators. Now, the folks who are trailing behind can say, we're not bothered by this, or they can say, we need to change because this is where value gets created. Now, I think the dark underbelly of this is that a lot of people, instead of saying we need to change and we have the power, say we see change and we feel threatened, and we get into the kind of totally dysfunctional politics that we have today around the globe because people feel threatened by the rate of change. Again, I think there are, many points of light in this where instead of being a victim of change, you can be an enabler of change. And my message to people who are there is, open your eyes, recognize what you don't know. There was a great HBR article, and then became a book called The Real Reason People Won't Change. Authors were Keegan and Leahy, who were two Harvard professors and psychology or something like that, and essentially and just read the article form from HBR. You don't need the book. Essentially, what they talk about is stages of maturity and self-awareness, and that people don't change because of a fear, and a fear that is not recognized. And their whole technique is to bring that fear to consciousness. What are you really afraid of? And what would be the worst thing that would happen? And what if? And you can think of it as like the Toyota 5 Whys, but instead the 5 what ifs. And you confront what if you do nothing, as opposed to what if you take action.
Yeah, the lack of a decision is a decision.
Exactly.
Like the lack of a decision is just saying, hey, I'm just going to be doing this.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the victim enabler triangle thing. Are you going to frame the world as a place that does stuff to you, or are you going to frame it as a place where you can do things? And if you just flip that perspective, you'll discover you can do things. Other people have done things. You can learn from that. You can experiment. You can treat experiments not as things from which you fail, but things from which you learn.
Yeah, I think that's such a great note to end on.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, Sam?
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's so wonderful
You
to have
guys
you.
are really great. It's so much fun to be here, and it's been such a beautiful week here. Thank you.
Oh, it's great to have you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by Heavybit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of Launch Darkly.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.